You know me that right down. Well, good evening. Good evening. Hope everyone is having an enjoyable time. I know I am. I was surfing the internet a couple of weeks ago. Actually, I was looking for some information on Edwin, and I ran across this article in Wikipedia about Druid High School. So I wanted to read it to the class of 71. I thought it was quite interesting. Druid High School, originally Industrial City High School, was a senior high school for black students in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, and part of the Tuscaloosa City Schools. The school had black children of all social classes. The instruction emphasized manual trades instead of university careers, and lacked the resources held by the all-white Tuscaloosa High School. The school had a reputation for strong teachers, as African Americans at the time had few other prestigious career options. Nicole Hannah-Jones of ProPublica stated Druid was a source of pride within the city's black community. In 1970, the school was desegregated, but only with a handful of students attending. In 1979, it was consolidated with Tuscaloosa High School to form Central High School. The former school identity, including mascots and colors, was discarded. Do I need to read that again? The former school identity, including mascots, colors, was discarded. Here I am, a member of the class of 1971, and we're here today to make certain that the legacy of Druid High School will not be discarded. Although the physical structure no longer exists and we no longer can walk the halls of our beloved school, unbreakable bonds were formed. Bonds of friendship, teamwork, networking, and support still exist some 50 years later. And evidently from last night, trash talking still exists 50 years later. This bond will not allow the legacy of Druid High School to be discarded. Druid High School will live on forever in the hearts and minds and in the spirit of our fearless leader, Dr. McDonough Hughes. In 1970, a new link was added to the bond which existed for the class of 1971. His name was Edwin Harrington. He was the first white student to attend Druid High School. Edward didn't need the National Guard patrolling the hall to protect him. The class of 1971 provided all the protection he needed. We readily accepted Edwin as our classmate, and Edwin readily accepted us. That bond continues to exist to this very day. Edwin really doesn't need an introduction because we all know Edwin, but Donna insisted that I share personal information for those who haven't kept up with what Edwin has been doing since graduation. And as we all know, there's pain to bear if you don't follow Donna's instructions. So Edwin currently resides in St. Petersburg, Florida, along with his wife of 20 years, Vivian, who was unable to make the trip today. Together they have 4 children and 9 grandchildren. He is currently winding down his career in healthcare supply chains with the company Intellia, where he served as senior vice president for one of their divisions. With him winding down, he now has time to focus on his true passion, which is sailing. He and Vivian love getting their sailboat out on the bay. He loved sailing so much, he decided to pursue his captain's license. And in 2020, he met the recommendations and requirements and received his captain's license from the United States Coast Guard. So I guess I know where I would be spending my 4th of July. Now, for a moment, I want to shift gears back to 1970. And as I mentioned, Edwin was the first white student in our class and to attend Druid High School. It took a lot of courage and bravery to enter the Dragon's Den that are known as Druid High School. Especially back in 1970, Tuscaloosa was not the bedrock of racial harmony during that time. I just have one question for Edwin. What in the hell were you thinking? Being the first to do anything is quite challenging. You never know what you might encounter. It could be smooth sailing most of the way, or you can find the water choppy, leading to chaos and turbulence. It's not for the feeble-minded or the weak at heart. Thank you, Edwin, for having the courage, bravery, and the heart in accepting the challenge to integrate Druid High School in 1970. I'm proud to have you as a fellow classmate of the best class to ever graduate from Druid High School. And as we said in the old days, no brag, just fact. So, your class of 1971, I present your speaker for the evening, Edwin.
Thank you, Cedric. I'm honored and humbled by that introduction. Thank you so much. How can it possibly be that more than 50 years have passed since we donned those blue robes and our caps and our tassels, and we proudly walked across that stage to receive our diplomas from Dr. McDonough? I struggle to get my mind around it, I truly do. It's hard for me to comprehend how 50 years, which seems like such a long time, could go by so amazingly fast. For that matter, how can it be that more than a year has passed since we had our virtual reunion last June? Again, an eventful year that has flown by. It was an impactful year since we got together and looked at our faces on that little Zoom screen. A lot of things have happened. Some of those things are very encouraging. Some of those events, political and otherwise, have been disappointing to us. I suppose it depends on one's individual perspective, but there are many challenges ahead, that's for sure. If I may, let me just take a moment to remind you of some of the things that we talked about last year on our virtual reunion. If you'll remember, we took a little time travel trip back to the 1970s. We started, and I know those of you sitting in the back cannot see this, but we started with this. This is a screenshot of the Tuscaloosa News from January 1st, 1970. This huge 72-point font headline just fairly screams at us. freedom of choice to end here. Sounds so ominous, doesn't it? Sounds scary. Almost sounds un-American for freedom of choice to end. Under that big headline, the story went on to say that the Department of Health, Education, and Welfare, as it was known then, had decided that it was time to further integrate the schools of Tuscaloosa. It went on to mention a number of different proposals that have been put forth to accomplish that task. One of those was that all 11th and 12th graders would go to Tuscaloosa High School, and 9th and 10th graders would go to Druid. Another was that Druid would become a third junior high school, with all the high schoolers consolidated at Tuscaloosa High School. The problem with all of those proposed solutions, very clear to everyone in this room, it meant that Tuscaloosa High School would be preserved and Druid High School would go away. The actual plan that was adopted was an east-west zoning plan. In my opinion, it was a good one. All students west of a certain boundary would go to Druid High School. All those students who lived east of that line would go to Tuscaloosa High School. Jerome and I were talking about this last week. Jerome and Lorenzo and I were all a part of this. If that plan had been implemented and executed as designed, I personally think it would have worked. There would have been roughly a roughly even racial mix in both schools, and both schools would have remained. The problem that existed was that Tuscaloosa's leaders had no intention of implementing or executing that plan as written. I had the occasion recently to sit down with a number of friends who graduated from Tuscaloosa High School in 1971. We had a great conversation. It was very candid. Many of those people lived in my neighborhood. We talked about that. And they were willing to share their strategies, schemes, to circumvent the plan. Some of them were adopted by relatives across town. Some of them had fake adoption papers drawn up. More commonly, my friend said their parents would rent an apartment across town that was on the other side of the line, and whether they ever went there or whether they ever stayed there, they had that address they could fall back on. I see some heads nodding. You spoke it, you know, you were there. Some of the boldest ones just put down a false address in hopes that it would not be verified. And it wasn't. I don't judge my friends for those decisions. I don't feel badly toward them for what they decided to do. It was their decision. But I knew that was not the right decision for me. We were talking, thank you. We were talking at the table a moment ago, and I said, you know, my parents left this decision entirely up to me. They said, what you think you should do, and we'll support you. So on September the 8th, 1970, my sister Mary and I walked through the doors of Druid High School, and we became Druid Dragons.
All right.
That decision changed everything for me. It didn't change anything that I believed. It did solidify the life values that I already had. What it gave me was the benefit of experiences that very few people can say they have had.
All right.
It gave me lifelong friends and people that I care about always. I have told our story all over this country to many different groups. And last year, you gave me the honor of sharing that conversation with my classmates. If you were on that Zoom call last year, then you may remember that was a very emotional moment for me. I'm going to try to do a little better for you tonight. As I thought about what I should talk about tonight, my mind went lots of different directions. This is such a positive event. It's so much fun to get together with people you haven't seen in years, to catch up, to hear about their children, their grandchildren, their great-grandchildren, to hear about their careers. As I started to write down things that I wanted to talk about, it felt like I was writing a book. And I thought, no, I can't do that. After about 15 minutes, they're going to walk out on you, so you got to pare it down a bit. But I did think about some things that I want to share with you for a few minutes. I thought about what significant events happened the year we graduated. What was going on in 1971 when we graduated? Well, there was a lot going on. For one thing, the voting age was lowered to 18. And in 1972, 1 year later, you and I had the opportunity to vote for the first time in a presidential election. Now, I made a lot of mistakes in my life. That was one of them. The candidate that I voted for was a mistake, but he was out of office in another 4 years or so, 2 years. Anyway, but I've never missed an opportunity to exercise that right to vote. There were other things going on in 1971. Disney World opened in Orlando, Florida. The first Starbucks opened at Pike Place Market in Seattle.
Yes.
Yes! A college student named Fred Smith started a company in Memphis that he called Federal Express, now FedEx. It changed the way we all think about sending and receiving. Our expectations changed tremendously after that. Also that year, Intel produced the first programmable microprocessor. And today, you and I carry these powerful computers around in our pockets and purses, and we take them for granted. Email was invented by a little-known gentleman named Ray Tomlinson. Changed how we think about communicating. Southwest Airlines started flying between 3 cities, Houston, Dallas, and San Antonio, and now they're the 4th largest airline in the country, and they got me here yesterday too. McDonald's, my last one. McDonald's introduced the quarter pounder. 53 cents. 53 cents for a quarter pounder. Now, I took my dates to El Burrito on University Boulevard because tacos were 35 cents. And that fit my budget. My budget being the money that I earned washing dishes at night at Mary Burke Dining Hall on the university campus. Now, James Akoff and Paul Young are not here with us tonight, but they graduated with us. They got me that job at Mary Burke Dining Hall, and we washed dishes 5 days a week at night, and those are friends that I haven't seen in many years, but I will always treasure their friendship and their support. So what else? What were we worried about in 1971? Today, we're worried about inflation. We read that inflation is now at 8.5%. The Fed is raising the interest rate to try to cool down the economy. And you and I go to the grocery store and things cost more every single time we go.
Yeah.
So we were worried about inflation. Are worried about inflation. What about 1971? Interesting. Inflation. Actually, we called it stagflation then because we had inflation taking prices up and a stagnant economy pushing jobs down. Stagflation was a big issue in 1971. President Nixon instituted wage and price controls. Do you remember that? Terrible decision. Didn't work. I'm sure that will never be tried again. But think about the commonality that 50 years later we're still dealing with. Today, with these powerful computers that we all carry around, we follow what's happening in the war in Ukraine. We can follow it on a daily basis, almost an hourly basis if we choose. In 1971, we were all very concerned about the Vietnam War. It was on all our minds. Some of our classmates served. Thank you for that service. A Harris poll in 1971 said that 60% of Americans opposed the direction our country was taking at that time. A lot of turmoil in the country in 1971, and I think you'll agree with me that we are still dealing with a lot of political turmoil today. Things that are still the same. But on a lighter note, every generation thinks that their music is the best. Every generation thinks that. I know our music was the best. If you don't think so, thank you. If you don't think so, when you're watching television at night, whether they're trying to sell you the latest prescription drug or insurance for your automobile, listen to the background music. It's our music they're playing in the background because it's the best music. What were we listening to? Well, Al Green sang to us that let's stay together. The Temptations said it's just my imagination running away with me. Jackson 5 said I never can say goodbye. Thank you. And Marvin Gaye asked us, what's going on? What else? Someone tell me another song that meant a lot to you in 1971. Let me hear it.
Do right.
Do right. We've only just, thank you, our class song. We've only just begun by the Carpenters. If I can only listen to one kind of music, and Vivian will tell you this, I'll walk through our living room and I'll say, "Hey Google, play Motown." Something else I thought about was, what if I could go back 51 years and have a conversation with that naive 18-year-old boy that I was? What advice would I give that young man? Would I be tempted to say, "Kid, keep your eyes open, and when you have a chance to buy stock in a company with a silly name like Apple, take it"?
Yeah.
Would I advise my 18-year-old self to take the odds on the 2015 Chicago Cubs to go from worst to first and win the World Series? I'd be tempted. I would. Would I even dare to give my 18-year-old self advice on my future love life? Somebody else help me out here. Brenda, if you could talk to your 18-year-old self, your 17-year-old self in 1971, what would you say?
I think, based on what I know now about life, my spiritual life, for sure, I would remind myself that God said, "I know the plans that I have for you. Plans for you to prosper and not be harmed. Before I formed you in your mother's womb, I chose you. I ordained you before my people. Therefore, I would say to myself, what God has for me is for me. Nobody and nothing could ever take that away from me as long as I keep my eye on the prize, which is in Jesus Christ." Yeah,
For those of you who are wondering, that was not really set up. I told Brenda just before I walked up here that I might call on you.
Yeah.
So let me tell you, her thoughts were spontaneous. Thank you, Brenda.
They really were.
Thank you. Here's where I landed. My wife and I had fun with this thought. What would we tell our teenage selves? We had a lot of fun with it. I'm not going to share some of those stories with you, but you may think about it. Here's where I landed. If I could go back and talk to my 18-year-old self, I would only have this advice. You're setting your goals too low. Set your goals way, way higher. Set outlandish expectations for yourself. Don't worry about what anyone would think if you fail. But set your goals way, way higher. And as I thought about that, I realized that this conversation was going the wrong way. I didn't need to give my 18-year-old self advice. I needed to ask my 18-year-old self, what advice would you give me? Here's what that 18-year-old Edwin said. He said, it's been 50 years. You've made a lot of mistakes, but you've had a fabulous life and you've been given many advantages. Your next birthday is a milestone event. You're going to be 70 on your next birthday. If you're fortunate, you may have 10, 15, 20 more years. My teenage self said, what are your goals? What outlandish expectations have you set for yourself? And how are you going to make the next years the best years? My 18-year-old self said, set your goals way, way higher. You're not doing enough today. Reunions are a lot of fun. I cannot tell you how much I look forward to being here. I can't tell you how much I enjoyed last night or tonight. This is one of the best events of my life, best nights of my life, and I thank all of you for that. I should insert there too, I must really thank the committee who worked so hard to put this together and do it so well. Thank you so much. So I'm going to leave you with this one thought tonight. As you go home, and as you think about the future for you, at whatever point you are in your life journey, I encourage you to set your goals way, way higher. Create outlandish expectations for yourself. Don't worry about what anyone would think if you fail, and just go for it. Thank you so much. I love you all. Thank you for allowing me to
be here. Many of us have read Luke 12, chapter 48. The verse that states, to whom much is given, much is required. When I think of this verse, I think about teachers live this daily. Our teachers grew up in an era where teaching was considered a noble profession with many restrictions. Not anyone could be a teacher. They sought and were given the knowledge, talents, skills, interests, and most of all, the tenacity to educate us. They were always prepared when they entered into their classrooms, and they expected no less from us. They had high expectations. No excuses were allowed. They had good classroom management skills. We all know that without this, no learning can take place. They administered corporal punishment when necessary and called parents when we acted inappropriately. Sure, there were teachers we thought were strict and downright mean. However, we must admit they did it because they cared. We are who we are today because they helped shape us intellectually. We are physicians, attorneys, educators, military personnel, entrepreneurs, accountants, etc. Today, we salute our angels of educational excellence. We will always appreciate and remember you, the deceased faculty and staff of Druid High School. Ms. Bell, Home Economics, William Bell, Assistant Principal, Fred Drake, History, Rachel Dunn, Special Education, Susie Eubanks, Cosmetology, John Fred, Assistant Principal, Hazel Hackett, Counselor, Annie Hall, Wanda, Math, Lester Hill, Math Coach, Julia Howard, Bookkeeper, Irene Hubbard, Librarian, Mary B. Hughes, Music, Esther Essie Jefferson, Secretary, Otis Johnson, Industrial Arts, Isom Lavender, driver's ed. Mary Madison, Dos Cinnamon Rose, cafeteria. Olivia Manise, librarian. Prada Martin, PE coach. Thomas Martin, biology coach. Arthur Matthews, government. Lou Mims, PE coach. Evelyn Mims, English. Mr. McCracken, industrial arts. Willie McCracken, home economics. Ronald Nelson, auto mechanics. Della Parker, typing. Brett Pickens, industrial arts. Melinda Prude, English. Elizabeth Rochelle, counselor. Pamela Rathers, English. Bank Sanders, science. Julia Anders, nurse. Miss Sparks, core. Armin Thomas, civics. Edna Tompkins, English. Chris Thompson, English. Rossi Thompson, band. Mr. Trudell, band. Pinky Wade, home economics. Cheney P. Washington, librarian. Mr. Washington, biology. Mr. Wilkinson, math. Mr. Wilson, electricity. Ms. Wilson, business. Last but not least, the principal known throughout the state of Alabama. The principal that served Industrial High and Druid High School for over 32 years. The one and the only, Dr. McDonald Hughes.
Okay, precious memories, how they linger. We all have a special place in our hearts for all of our classmates who have passed on before us. And they walked through the same halls that we did at Druid High School, the same halls, and we have close memories of all of those classmates. And I wanted to say that we have a big reunion here. This is a grand reunion, but there's a better grand reunion when we get to see them again.
Good evening, class of 71. The greatest class in Druid High School.
Yes, sir.
I would like to thank, I put together a video of those that have fallen. And I would like to thank the people that assisted me. Teresa Davis, Ms. Merriweather, Flora Bonner, and Reverend Lorenzo James. Without a family helping me do this,